first talk about the ideology behind the Black Panther Party, I need to discuss what the Black Panther Party was. And so it was founded in 1966 by Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale. And it quickly created a 10-point plan program, which was created by interviewing individuals of the Oakland, California community and coming to a conclusion about the good that they wanted to see transferred into the world, the good in their mind. And they was split, and the Black Panther Party was split up by several chapters across the United States. Some of the most famous ones are the Oakland one and the Chicago one. So how did they work to solve the problems? Well, their most famous was arming Black people, and this would help to reduce the amount of police violence that was currently affecting Black people. And so, for example, members of the Black Panther Party would patrol predominantly Black neighborhoods, and when someone was pulled over, they would walk up to the car with their guns and make sure that the citizens' constitutional rights were being protected by the police officer. But they also worked to make the world a better place in their minds in other ways. They provided free breakfast for hungry children. They organized anti-war protests for the Vietnam War. They provided free health clinics, free clothing and shoe programs, and distributed their weekly newspaper, The Black Panther. And so you can argue that some of these things are more radical and people won't agree with them, like the anti-war protest or the arming of individuals. But lots of these, like providing free breakfast for hungry children, free health clinics, and clothing and shoe programs, almost transcend politics, and that everybody is going to agree that these are goods to put into the world, regardless of their ideology behind them, or regardless of their outcome. And so it's important to note that the Black Panthers, despite their ideology, put good into our world and into our nation. And that's important to know. But it's also important to understand why they did that. One interpretation of this is Professor Jacoby Williams' interpretation, which he discusses in an interview by Vox, which I will play now.
By police. Media coverage depicted party members as a caricature of Black militancy.
The Black Panther Party was portrayed as a marauding gang. They say their goal was to kill all the white people.
In reality, the Panthers did call for radical change.
What they were hoping for was a revolution to overthrow the capitalist enterprise.
But what they called revolution might not actually sound so radical today.
Focused on socialism as a way of solving economic needs. They looked to places like Canada, which always had a democratic political system, but the economic system has always been socialism. So they want a democratic socialist country here in the United States, which they saw as a more equitable, more humane
system. Sorry, it cuts out there. So Professor Jacoby Williams is saying that socialism or democratic socialism was what the Black Panthers wanted. Now, that's a bit confusing, at least for me. And mostly this comes from the definition of socialism can have several different meanings. And so I'm going to discuss each of those meanings and how they will be used in the context of this presentation. So the first definition of socialism is the Marxist definition of socialism. And basically the idea behind this is communism has two phases. The first phase, or the lower phase, is socialism. And this is basically the transition from capitalism to communism. Now, whatever you believe about Marx and his views, it's important to know that he was at least a smart person, even if maybe his views didn't work out the best. And he knew that it was going to take a bit of time for in his mind, the perfect utopia of a classless, moneyless, stateless society to happen. And so he introduced this time in between as socialism. And the best way to think about it is, if communism in his mind is each working according to their own ability and each getting paid according to their need, socialism is each getting paid according to their ability and each getting paid according to their ability. And so Marx believed that there were still problems that capitalism posed for socialism, and that's why it took so long to transition from capitalism to communism. And so words will be used interchangeably with this type of socialism, like Marxist and communist. Basically, the idea of a revolution of both economic and political, first starting with a socialist system, but hopefully, in their mind, moving toward a communist system. The second ideology of socialism is it's the movement away from a laissez-faire form of capitalism to more equitable conditions for the working class. And so this can take several different ways. This can show itself in several different ways. It can be less radical, like the introduction of more antitrust laws, to being super radical, like UBI, Universal Basic Income, or worker co-ops. But the idea is that the movement away from laissez-faire capitalism to reformism inside of capitalism to be more equitable for workers is called socialism. And here it's used interchangeably with words like democratic socialism and reformism. And it's important to note that in Professor Jacoby Williams' mind, this democratic socialism is a sort of revolution. To him, it's a revolution of an economic system, just not a political one. Now, you may disagree with this interpretation, but it's important to know that that's how Professor Jacoby Williams sees it. So for this paper, to make it a little bit easier to understand, when I say socialism, I will be using it interchangeably with words like Marxist and communist. And so I will be talking about the revolution from the revolution of an economic and political system. And when I talk about democratic socialism, I will use that interchangeably with reformism, and that will refer to only the economic revolution. And of course, you may disagree with calling it the economic revolution, but Professor Jacoby Williams talks about the economic revolution, only the economic revolution, so it's important to remember. So we can see that Professor Jacoby Williams agrees with the second definition of communism, or socialism, the second definition of socialism, the democratic socialism, or the reformism. And so we're going to make sure, we're going to give them the benefit of the doubt here that he believes this system. So we're going to watch another clip of him kind of explaining, in his mind, the ideology of the Black Panther Party.
So what kind of stereotypes are being challenged by your study?
Well, the huge stereotype, even today, is that the Black Panther Party is the black version of the Ku Klux Klan, and that they hate white people and they are a terrorist organization. All those are untruths. The Black Panther Party is a black power organization, but it doesn't fit the traditional black nationalist model, meaning they are not an anti-white organization. They were a socialist organization, an anti-capitalist organization is the best description to describe them, who use socialism as a way of bringing poor and disparate people together to form coalitions to fight against the capitalist structure. And in doing so, they work with all kind of groups, regardless of their particular backgrounds, especially poor people. And so they don't hate white people. They actually organize with folks from all walks of life. And two, they were not about simply just trying to overthrow the United States government. They actually just wanted to eliminate the economic system, which is capitalism. They believed that capitalism was a dividing factor in not only the United States, but especially in its imperialistic tendencies and foreign policies that tended to prevent the United States from living up to its ideals as a democracy.
Okay. So again, Professor Jacoby Williams talks about capitalism, as in they wanted to remove or revolt against capitalism, but not the political system of America. So what Professor Jacoby Williams is saying in both of these is that not only was the Black Panther Party not the black version of the Ku Klux Klan, but also they weren't so radical that they were communist or Marxist. Instead, they were democratic socialist that only wanted to overthrow or destroy the economic system, not the political system. So what do other intellectuals in this field have to say about this? Well, Jessica C. Harrison's interpretation in her journal article, Revolutionary Black Nationalism, the Black Panther Party, she kind of argues something different. She says that the party's ideology was based on aspects of Marxist-Leninism, or socialism. And she said that Newton stressed that the current values in America were capitalistic values that legitimized the economic and the political exploitation of the common people. Newton called for a new system in which the production of goods and the provision of services is based upon the needs of the people and does not function for profit-making purposes. So, Harris believes that the Black Panther Party was a socialist group that was based on teachings of Marx and Lenin, and that Newton had problems not only with the economic process but also the political process. Let's look at another interpretation. Meredith Ramon's interpretation in her article, The Black Panther Party and the Struggle for Human Rights. She says that the Panthers insisted that they did not believe that socialism would automatically eliminate racism, but rather it would provide more favorable conditions for its eradication and for the building of a society that guaranteed respect for the human rights of all citizens. Again, socialism is what they look for more. Even more, she says that foreign revolutionaries like Fanon and Mao Zedong served as sources of inspiration for the Panthers. So Ramon believes again that the Black Panther Party was a socialist group, a Marxist group, and argues that they took Fanon and Mao Zedong, two historically socialist thinkers, as inspiration. But we don't just need historical interpretations to understand that there might be a problem with Professor Jacoby Williams' interpretation. We can also look at the primary versions ourselves, the primary resources, and the historical notes ourselves. So here's a quote from Huey P. Newton, which again was the founder of the Black Panther Party. Also remember that Professor Jacoby Williams' interpretation of democratic socialism is only overthrowing or removing the economic system and not the political system. So here's Huey P. Newton. The Black Panther Party felt that the present government and its subsidiary institutions were illegitimate because they failed to meet the needs of the people. Therefore, they had no right to exist. The party felt that in the interest of the people, new institutions, both political and economic, should be established, and that old institutions should disappear. So here we have Huey P. Newton, the founder of the Black Panther Party, looking back on the ideology of the Black Panther Party and saying that the party found problems with both the social and the economic institutions, and that they wanted new social and economic institutions, and they wanted old social and economic institutions to be removed. At the same time, we have Professor Jacoby Williams saying that the Black Panther Party only wanted to remove the economic system, which again, when he says remove the economic system, he doesn't actually mean remove, he just means reforming it radically. But here we can see, even under that definition, Professor Jacoby Williams disagrees with the creator of the Black Panther Party on the ideology of the Black Panther Party. But we can go even farther than that. See, Newton, when he first started the party, was very closely linked with Mao Zedong. To provide the money to buy the arms for the Black Panther Party, Newton sold transcripts from Chairman Mao Zedong, also called the Little Red Book, to people at Berkeley. And here on this slide, we can see the Black Panthers waving their Little Red Book. Even more, in the Black Panther Party's 10-point plan, they use a lot of vocabulary that relates right back to Marxist ideology. And so in the same way, we can look at the 10-point plan and see if there is Marxist vocabulary in there. And to no surprise, there is. They use phrases like the means of production, which has historically always been related back to Marxism. And they say things like the robbery of capitalists, which screams Marxism. And in the middle of sentences, they will uppercase the landlords for no good reason. The landlords is a little bit of a more difficult one to understand. Basically, remember, Huey P. Newton directly breeds Mao Zedong because he has transcripts, he has the Little Red Book, and he sells the Little Red Book. And one of Mao's largest critiques and largest, in their minds, additions to communist theory is his large critique of landlords. Mao hates landlords, and a lot of his early movements inside of China also related to the removal of landlords. And so with Huey P. Newton, the creator of the Black Panther Party's 10-point plan, uppercasing landlords, that's a subtle nod to Mao and his teachings. And finally, this one is a little less important and should be used when citing or trying to understand the Black Party as Marxist, but I think it's still important, is that Marx in his Communist Manifesto also created a 10-point plan. And Marx, in his 10-point plan, didn't just call for a revolution, he called for more than that, right? Because, again, Marx is a pretty smart guy, and Marxists believe that a revolution will only happen when a failure in capitalism happens, like a depression or a recession. And so Marx is not going to only call for a revolution when everything's going as planned. And he's not going to dive deep into cynicism and just wait for that thing to happen, because he believes at some point it will automatically happen. And so he works to solve problems inside of capitalism. And that's what a lot of his 10-point plan in the Communist Manifesto is. Even though he is obviously a Marxist, it's named after him, he's a communist, he still works to change inside the system. And we can see the same thing in the Black Panthers' 10-point plan, that they're working to change inside the system, even if they believe in a communist revolution. Okay, so I think we've done a pretty good job of showing that, for some reason or another, Jacoby Williams is wrong about his interpretation here. Now, we're not going to go into whether or not this was on purpose, or whether or not he just didn't look at any of the other sources. But what we do know is it's almost non-debated in historical groups that the Black Panther Party was communist. And we can see through our own historical inductive reasoning that they were communist. But they also weren't the black version of the Ku Klux Klan, like Jacoby Williams and every other interpretation directly said. Neither of the other two interpretations mentioned anything about them being them hating white people or not wanting to work with white people. And so what Jacoby Williams does is he looks at the public outcry or the public vision of the Black Panther Party, which says that they were nothing more than the black version of the Ku Klux Klan. And he says, no, they weren't. They put good into the world, and they weren't that. And he is able to create these figures and these people who put good, and he goes even farther than them just being radical at all, and he makes them democratic socialists, right? And so now what we have is two conflicting ideas, the beginning one and then the reactionary one. The beginning one seeing them only as evil villains, and the reactionary one showing them as good people. Good people in that they believe in, at least at some degree, the political system that we believe in. And so there's a conflict there. It's a binary system. And the Black Panther Party, as we've seen, is so much more diverse and complex than that. So, we can see that both of these viewpoints are wrong, and that they actively hurt the party. Not only by making these people into figures and trying to create them into images and objects more than actual people, but also because when you change a party's economic, or a party's ideology behind it, that's no longer the social group they represent. That goes for any social group. When you change their ideology behind their actions, no matter what their actions are, if you change their ideology, they are no longer the group they are, and it's almost as bad as not remembering them at all. So the question is, we failed in the past, and pretty bad. We have a society that either believes that the Black Panther Party is the black version of the Ku Klux Klan, or believes that they were only democratic socialists. So what do we do to solve that? Because they were a lot more complex than that, and it's a lot more difficult to talk about things like that. Because as I've said, the Black Panther Party and the good they put in the world at some points transcended politics, right? They provided free breakfast, and they had health programs. These are just fundamental goods in our world. But at the same time, their empowerment for doing so came directly from Marxist teaching. And so how do we as Americans and political scientists, how do we acknowledge that the Black Panthers' empowerment and motivation came from Marxist ideology while still showing the good they put into the world? And that doesn't just mean having a long and complicated and nuanced discussion about that at an AP or college level, but that also means being able to turn it into curriculum that we can use for third graders and eighth graders and freshmen. So the question is, how do we do that in a way that respects the Black Panther Party, shows the good they put into the world, but shows that a lot of the ideology was fundamentally different than what the American system agrees with?